I would like to welcome everyone. I'm your host, Eric Pepper. We are now all sheltering in place. What we have seen during COVID-19 is an increase, especially among students and other people as well, increase in depression rates. Students at Berkeley report about 38% having depression and anxiety. We see nationally an increase in suicides and also domestic violence. Mark, you're on with your program on working through interpersonal conflict in the age of COVID-19.
Thank you so much for having me today. I have been mediating for over 30 years and studied negotiation and mediation at Harvard Law School and many other schools. And my doctorate is in humanistic psychology that I received at Saybrook University, which is here in San Francisco. But according to many people, conflict resolution there are fundamentals involved in conflict resolution. And I would probably start out by telling you, and I'm just going to read a little blurb that I used at the American Psychological Association convention last year. Recognizing and resolving conflict needs. If you are out of touch with your feelings or so stressed that you can only pay attention to a limited number of emotions, you won't be able to understand your own needs. If you don't understand your deep-seated needs, you will have a hard time communicating with others and staying in touch with what is really troubling you. For example, couples often argue about petty differences, the way she hangs the towels, the way he parts his hair, and I can add another one because this was a mediation that I conducted this week, the way he puts his toilet paper roll in the bathroom. Whether it goes out or in, you know that story, right? Amazing, but that was an issue for one of the parties, and so we had to get through that. In personal relationships, a lack of understanding about differing needs can result in distance, and we know about distance now. Arguments and breakups. In workplace conflicts, differing needs are often at the heart of bitter disputes. When you recognize the legitimacy of conflicting needs and become willing to examine them in an environment of compassionate understanding, it opens pathways to creative problem solving, team building, and improved relationships. When you resolve conflict and disagreement quickly and painlessly, mutual trust will flourish. Now, why did I give you those two paragraphs? Because that's what I'm dealing with in my practice right now. It is very interesting, and I was talking to Eric about this earlier. The types of cases that are coming by my desk now have changed drastically since COVID-19. Sure, there were always problems in relationships, and there were a lot of misunderstandings, and there were a lot of issues of improper use of listening and wrong ways of telling the person that you're with that you're having a problem with them, no use of iMessages and all of that, which I'm sure you're all well versed with. But now they're becoming more of an issue because we're trapped. We're trapped. We've learned from the pandemic that we're all facing death and are therefore, one, connected by crisis and individuals in conflict. So what happens when you're in conflict and there is no pandemic? We sit down, we talk about it, we figure out what our differences are, we try to work that out, we try to get better understanding of each other. What happens when we do this during a pandemic? I'm having difficulties getting two parties to even be in the same room. Even when we're talking about a Zoom room, I can't get them to both be there. Maybe they've waited too long to contact me, and that could be a possibility. I'm sure it is in many cases, where they've just waited, hoping it was going to go away and waiting for it. And what it does is it essentially festers, makes things worse. And the next thing you know, something that would have been minimal in your life that was done by your significant other is becoming a tragic event for everyone involved. So what I have to do is sidestep the mediation process and start doing what we know as conflict coaching, where essentially, even though they refuse to be in the same room, so we can't really have a mediation, That's not the end of it. We have another source, another venue for them, and it would be seeing each one individually and essentially teaching them the skills that they need to know and they need to learn in order to better communicate with each other. One of the things I would talk about is successful conflict resolution depends on your ability to. I would probably preface everything that I would do with them by saying that conflict is inevitable. Conflict is not a bad thing. Conflict is important for your relationship to grow. And if you choose not to resolve it or try to work things out, your relationship is not going to go anywhere except probably to finality and more than likely leaving each other in the process. So the first thing I'd want to know is, are you managing your stress? Do you know how to stay calm? By staying calm, you can accurately read and interpret verbal and nonverbal communication. Stress causes emotions, emotions cause stress. It's sort of an endless cycle. So therefore, chances are your verbal and nonverbal skills are not at their peak while you're in a stress mode. The next thing I would probably share with them is, are you able to control your emotions and your behavior? Telling them that when they're in control of their emotions, they can communicate their needs without threatening, frightening, or punishing the other. And I probably should underline punishing, because the kinds of things that are going on in the cases that I'm dealing with now are absurd at the very least. Followed by pay attention to the feelings of others. I would actually add, do you even know what your feelings are? Some people are so out of touch with their own feelings, in no way would they be capable of understanding what somebody else is going through if they themselves don't even understand what they're going through. And then last but certainly not least, be aware of and respectful of your differences. By avoiding disrespectful words and actions, you can resolve the problem faster. So this would be sort of a general sense. This is my way. I wouldn't necessarily ask them all of these things, but I would sort of vet in my conversations with them as to whether or not they're even aware that these things might be problematic for them. Not necessarily for the other person, but ultimately it would be, because if you're out of touch with these issues, then chances are your ability to accurately and effectively work with the other person are going to be non-existent. Very difficult for them to do. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Does anyone have any questions about any of that?
Well, I would have a question, and the question would be, when you ask me, can I read other people's emotions or my own? I may say yes, and yet I may be not very skilled at that. And especially the more upset I am, the less likely I am aware of my own emotions or the clients. And how do you deal with that?
Well, again, it's sort of a feeling out process. I want to find out where they are right now before I even ask them about where they think they are in the relationship. I know that sounds psychological, but that's my background. And so I do ask those questions. And if I see that there's something that is definitely missing in terms of any of these four issues that I bring up in the beginning, I may try to help them, but I may also refer them to some agency that does that. And I have a list of people who are colleagues that would probably be better equipped to handle specific issues that might be coming out of these conversations that I have with these parties. and not try to be multifaceted and have several hats that I put on, thinking, okay, now I'm going to be the psychologist, and okay, now I'm going to be the family expert and all that. I have to understand that I can't do everything. But what I can do is flesh out potential problems that might be in the character of that particular individual, and perhaps we can work on it to some degree. I think just teaching them how to deal with nonverbal and verbal skills could be a good source of, resolution to whatever problems might come up during that first phase of vetting and first phase of asking questions and determining just where they are uh, alone by themselves without having to even deal with the other person in the relationship. So I have to understand that even though I'm an expert, and I'll use that air quotes, in the field of conflict resolution, there are a lot of things that come up that I am not equipped to deal with. You know, if I find that there might be need, there may be a disorder, a psychiatric disorder, or maybe a chemical imbalance that might be happening, or this person is not going to be able to understand anything I'm going to talk about because they can't focus on what it is I'm saying. In the past, I've had issues in my mediation sessions where somebody was on drugs or somebody was drunk. And I have to stop the process as soon as I find that out and say, we're not getting anywhere here. Let's reschedule. And I would appreciate it if you would take the responsibility of not coming back to the session in the same state you're in right now. Without being accusing, obviously, I don't want to, alienate them from the process of mediation, but and not being a judge, because I am a neutral person. I can't make judgment calls on people. I'm neutral. So I have to be very careful how I approach that. Fortunately, it's not often, but I'm finding it more often than not now. And again, under COVID-19, people are reacting and acting in ways that they probably weren't before. So everything seems to be accelerated, if that makes any sense. It might have been a problem on a scale of 1 to 10. Maybe it was a problem that was somewhere around 4. But because of the circumstances, because of the fear factor, because of the unknown, because people are overly stressed now because of COVID-19, it's now an 8. And somehow I have to bring the 8 back down to the 4 where it belongs and then deal with that. So hopefully that answers your question, Eric.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? I'm going to be throwing a lot at you. Yeah, Suzanne.
Yeah, hi, thank you. So you might be covering this in your talk, so I might be just jumping ahead. But so if there is a conflict and I want to speak about the situation, but the other person is, let's say, flighty or avoiding discussion or conflict, how do I go about with that? So for example, if I allow them to scurry away every time, then it just sort of prolongs the discussion and they tense up if I remind them that I want to have that discussion. So they just get more flighty and then nothing gets resolved. So I don't know what to do in order to encourage that discussion to occur.
Well, this is essentially why I'm talking about conflict coaching. But if you did want to try to encourage this person to come to someplace and talk to you about it, there are many ways of going through that. I would think that just by conflict handling style, and the Thomas Kilmann instrument is one of the ones that I use in my class to determine what your conflict handling style is or what your conflict handling styles are. This person that you're referring to may be an avoider. That person may have, on a scale of 1 to 12, may have scored a 10 in avoidance. And you may be in competitiveness or willing to accommodate or collaborate or compromise, might be scoring higher. And so, we have 2 different conflict handling styles. We've got somebody who would rather not deal with it versus somebody who wants to deal with it. So that's one way of looking at it. Now let's move it into another realm. Maybe it's the importance of the relationship. And I hope that that wouldn't be what plays into this. But it could be that the relationship or the issues at hand are more important to you than it is to the other person. So you have a disparity. It's really important to me, but it's not so important to the other person. So then the idea would be in some way of communicating the fact that it's important to you. And if I'm important to you, then this should be important to you. Avoidance is a very interesting conflict handling style. There are two ways of looking at it. Either you enjoy avoiding because either it doesn't mean enough to you and you pick your battles, so to speak, or it should be important to you because the relationship is based on whether or not you're going to sit down with the other person and have a running dialogue on how you're feeling in the relationship. Does that make sense? So there's a good and bad. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing to be an avoider. You don't want to be in conflict situations. But if it's something that has to do with you and a relationship you're in and it means a lot to you, that's where the avoider is going to take on the challenge of engaging in the conflict dialogue and determining what needs to be done in order to enrich, to make that relationship grow, and to maintain the relationship essentially. So I just gave you two ways of looking at what's going on there, you know, but you and you alone know how important it might be to the other person. We already know, you've established that it's important to you, and that's great. But if it's important to you, and this is I'm not sure what kind of relationship we're talking about, if it's just a coworker or a friend or a significant other, or maybe an insignificant other, then only that person has the ability to do it. You can't force someone to have a dialogue about a conflict that you're having, unfortunately. And in mediation, one thing that I've always known is that if someone contacts me and I'm hearing that they have a problem, I need to contact the other person. That other person can say no. I don't want to go talk to her. I don't want to get in a room and talk to her, even if it was remote. And that's what started this conversation, right? That the issues that I'm dealing with now is that I'm not finding that many people wanting to mediate. I want them to, they'd rather have conflict coaching where I see them individually. So Suzanne, the perfect answer for you would probably be, if the other person is willing, would be conflict coaching if they choose not to do mediation. Does that make sense? It's a long-winded answer to your question, but
Yes.
you know, there are two ways of going, three ways of going. The most, go ahead.
So if you could repeat the name of the method, Thomas something.
Oh, the Thomas Kilmann.
Okay, I will look at Thomas Kilmann.
Yeah, just look up conflict handling styles on you could Google it.
Okay.
Or maybe Google Scholar if you want to get some research behind that. But that's been used since, geez, I think it's since the 60s or 70s. And I use that in my class just so students get some insight on what conflict handling styles they use. And I would say the majority, if not the consensus in any of my classrooms, is that there were no surprises. Whatever they came up with didn't surprise them in the least. I'd say if there's any surprise, it's usually with the athletes because they compete on the field, they compete on the court, and they thought they were going to score high in competition, but they find that they're scoring higher in avoidance or maybe compromise or accommodation. And so what I tell them is, like, you've got to separate the competitive side of you when you're in a sport mode from the you outside of the sport mode. Does that make sense? So if we were looking at them as an athlete, yeah, of course they're competitive. No athlete's going to say, well, it's okay if you win once in a while and then I'll win once in a while. There's no room for that in sports. But when they're off the court, when they're off the field, then we're started looking at the fact that maybe they tend to be an avoider. They don't like confrontation, but when they're on their court and when they're in their element, look out, right? Different personas for each individual. So yeah, look that up and see. And maybe if your person wants to have mediation, you can go to mediate.com. How easy is that, right? Mediate.com. And then you can put in the search engine, where your location is geographically, what kind of issue it is. Do you want a male or female mediator? How much experience you want that person to have? You hit go, and then it gives you 5 people in your area who could possibly help you, and their contact information. And then you can find out, you know, whether or not you want to have somebody come and mediate between you and the other person. If the other person refuses to be part of that, then we talk about conflict coaching. And you can also find a conflict coach on mediate.com. How's that?
Yeah, so that the competitor element is really important. So this person is my father. And so of course there's that hierarchy relationship where if I mention something and then he will cut me off or tell me that someone else is on the line or make some excuse he has to go, or he will kind of raise his voice and be very overbearing and tell me it's not important. He doesn't know why I'm making a big deal, why I'm bringing it up. And I didn't even have a chance to discuss anything. And already all the doors and cabinets are slamming. And so very dramatic, very over the top. And he seems to think, oh, we already talked about it. It's done. It's already taken care of. But actually, there was no discussion. Okay. It was just that maybe he heard partial of it. And to him, he thinks that there's nothing for him to do or nothing for us to do or anything to learn from it, just that he heard part of it and nothing else.
Yeah, what we could do, because there's a lot we could discuss about this, but what I would suggest is that perhaps if you want to hang on at the end, I don't know, Eric, we could talk about this a little further and give you some suggestions of what you might want to do.
I think that would be a great idea. So, I mean, Mark is very generous that for those who have more personal issues for a moment or want to explore this more, I know he's willing to stay around for a little while. So thank you.
Yeah, we can do that. We can talk. Yeah, I'm working on a case right now where 5 siblings, and they're all in their 20s and 30s, and they're trying to convince their father to let them see their mother because their mother has just been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and they want to go and see her. They're all over the map. They're everywhere in the United States, and they're willing to all go and join and see her, but he doesn't want them to see her. And we were all set to set up a session. I met with all the 5 siblings. Now we were going to meet with the 5 siblings and the father. And at the very last minute, I get an email from one of the siblings saying, Dad changed his mind. He doesn't want to do it. So there's, you know, this is not I don't want to belittle or make light of your situation, but it is so common right now. Again, because of COVID, crazy things are going on, and things are happening that normally wouldn't happen under normal circumstances, which these are far from normal right now. But we can talk. We'll definitely talk about that. So I want to share another screen with you. There are many, but here's one where I want to sort of, again, vet and flesh out from each of the parties in the conflict. First, unhealthy responses. And of course, you know, the next slide is going to be healthy responses. But the unhealthy responses to conflict are characterized by one is an inability to recognize and respond to matters of great importance to the other person. And notice it's great importance to the other person. We kind of know what's great importance to you. But do you know what the importance and what the issues are for the other person? So in other words, I'd sum that up as lack of empathy. And I think anyone living in this country right now has a strong connection to what that means. In leadership mode, you would expect the leaders to be empathetic, to be able to wonder or know what it's like to be that other person, or to try to find out what it's like to be that other population, whatever that might be. And we're finding in this country that that's not the case. And that's adding to the fear factor. We no longer have anyone we can communicate and make sense of what's going on, because the person who is in leadership role is not sharing that. In fact, sharing the exact opposite of what's really going on. So there's a disconnect, and it just adds to the fear factor as far as I'm concerned. Next is the explosive, angry, hurtful, and resentful reactions. And we all know about what hangry means, but any of you who have driven a car these past few months on the freeway, road rage is at an all-time high. The Highway Patrol have now listed these past few months as the most speeding tickets ever given out in California. I have no idea what it's like in other states in the country, or what it's like in other parts of the world, but I do know that it is amazing how fast people are driving. I don't know if any of you have noticed that, but I attribute that to COVID and the fear factor and the unknown factor for people. They shouldn't be driving, essentially, but they are. And I don't know if they think that the faster they drive, the quicker they'll get out of COVID's way. I'm not sure what the logic is behind it, but I do notice when it rains out, people have a tendency to speed because they want to get out of the rain. And that's, maybe it's because they're hungry, and their ability to critically think is non-existent at the time. So people that are explosive, angry, hurtful, resentful reactions, essentially, they need to be aware. I'm not trying to school them. I'm not trying to, tell them they're bad or anything like that. I think it's really important for them to become aware that this exists in your lives, and that if you are explosive and you're not counting to 10, that's the old way, right? Or you're not eating a good diet, you're on an empty stomach, or you're not hydrating, or you're not taking care of yourself, or you're not taking care of yourself within this pandemic that we're dealing with. It's very common for people to be explosive when they normally are not, to be angry when they're normally not, or angrier than they normally would be, to be hurtful, resentful, lashing out, hurting people physically, emotionally, psychologically. This is all going on now. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because I'm finding this to be more an issue now than it was 6 months ago in the cases that I'm dealing with. Next is the withdrawal of love, resulting in rejection, isolation, shaming, and fear of abandonment. Now, these are all natural tendencies. People don't do well without any of these. We're just not hardwired to be alone. We're not hardwired to be in isolation. So there is a lot of shaming going on, and I'm finding that to be sort of endemic to what's happening in our lives right now during this pandemic. Next thing I'd want to know from them is, what are your expectations of bad outcomes? Do you have expectations of bad outcomes? And this goes into your attitude towards conflict in general. And Suzanne, this kind of plays into what you were talking about. If you have had bad experiences in the past where your attempt to resolve a conflict ended up blowing up in your face and getting even worse, then maybe your expectation overall is that it's going to be a bad outcome no matter what kind of conflict you get yourself into. And it might cause you to avoid in time when you shouldn't be avoiding. So what's your conflict myth? There are so many. Conflict's bad. Conflict is terrible. Conflict is stressful. Conflict is war. Conflict, on and on and on and on. Nobody talks about conflict is enriching for a relationship. It means a growth potential. Conflict is a new understanding. Conflict is great for the person. Nobody talks about that. When I put that on the board in my classrooms and I say, give me one word that best describes conflict for you, they're almost all negative. So the idea is to get the negative part of it into the positive and changing the attitude towards conflict. So expectation of bad outcomes, that would be something worthy of working with if I find that that's the issue with one or both of the parties in this particular conflict. And last but certainly not least, the fear and avoidance of conflict. And Suzanne, that could be a problem with your dad, as he's avoiding it, and there's some fear factor involved there. And you know, without getting all psychological about it, what's his fear? Is he fearing that you're going to shame him? Is he fearing that you might win? And that unfortunately is a mindset of people who think that for me to win, you have to lose. Or if I lose, you won, as opposed to the win-win, which we hear so much about. But that particular conflict attitude will affect the person's avoidance factor to the point where even though they know it's important in the relationship and that it would really behoove them to sit down and have a nice discussion and good dialogue, they won't do it because they're afraid of something. And that could be an issue for you. All right, I'm going to stop sharing again. Anybody have anything to add? Yes, Blessing.
Hi, I wrote quite a bit about, I come from a family that's all conflict avoidant. My parents, my kids, my ex, and came from Germany. Parents were Holocaust survivors. And, and, you know, I was trying to deal with a conflict at a family event where our kids were all visiting for my youngest daughter's graduation. And it was kind of a touchy situation. My son and his wife were inviting everyone for the first time to their new home. And I just asked her father, she was staying with her father, my oldest daughter. And I just asked him, can you help me out with picking up, how am I going to meet Beth for breakfast before she leaves tomorrow? Because he lives in Martinez and I lived in Alameda at the time. And he kept stonewalling me. I'm working. He kept responding to everything I said, and everyone's sitting there. And he'd been doing some things all weekend that were painful, and because his new wife was there. And I did the wrong thing. I said, why are you doing this? And like everybody just disappeared. Nobody called him on the stonewalling. I was made into the bad one. It caused years of wounding, years. They all just, he said, I don't want to be anywhere where she is. And I'm just saying, you know I need to take ownership and designate someone else. I could have said, okay, Beth, you work this out with your dad. He ended up bringing her the next day in spite of all that pain. But, you know, designate someone else to more directly get involved. And Eric has taught me to start with the positive and then bring up the problem and not with blame. And you know, and I've learned through 2 degrees in psychology that you try to focus on the problem, like David White, the story process. And I'm not a psychologist, I'm a health educator, but I just, you know, rather than the person's actions or behaviors or attitudes, you try to say, okay, the problem here is how to get Beth, you know, I don't know, I'm not sure. The problem is communication, and communication is the issue, not the people necessarily, you know. But, and then with my own son, I'm having a really hard time.
I saw that in your chat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, you said focus on the problem, but I also would suggest focusing on the present. In this case, not dwelling in the past. Obviously, there's been a lot of pain, a lot of things have happened in the past, but in order to be effective now, it might help the other person who you're trying to get involved with this, to not focus so much on the past and going forward. How can we do things differently? What can we do now that we weren't doing before? There are times in my sessions where we have to dwell on the past because, as I mentioned, things are so bad right now. How were things when you first went out, when you were first friends? Tell me what that was like, and then possibly bringing that to the forefront. But there's another way of looking at it. And I think in your case, maybe not focusing so much on the past, because we already established the past was not good and it was very hurtful. And there's a lot of pain. And you're wounded, and you're not the only one. I'm sure that other people in that relationship are wounded as well. So where do we go now? And if we focus on the present and start establishing new ground rules, perhaps, from now on, when you're upset with me, I want you to come and tell me right away. Let's not play avoidance. There's an awful lot of avoidance in relationship. There's an awful lot of avoidance in families, and it's really destroying families. The fact that nobody wants to sit down. When I deal with roommate conflicts, the first thing I ask them is, do you have any monthly meetings? Do you have any, house meetings? And if you're griping and groaning about somebody didn't do the dishes when it was their turn, or someone didn't walk the dog or whatever, write those things down. And then you can have your little gripe session with ground rules, right? No interrupting, treating each other with respect, the things that everyone would expect to have in such a meeting, and then air out your issues there and let that get done. But what I'm finding in roommate situations is they don't have anything in place. They just avoid, they use nonverbal communication in the worst way, and verbal communication in the worst way. A lot of shaming, and why don't you do this, and what's wrong with you, and you always do this and you never do that, which is not going to be effective in trying to have discussions in a conflict situation. But I would suggest maybe, this is another slide that I'm not going to show you, but focus on the present, make the relationship your priority, pick your battles, be willing to forgive, and last but certainly not least, know when to let something go. And that's easier said than done, right?
Yes.
Mark,
Yeah.
I think those are great suggestions. And as I think of the clock as well, I thought maybe for the end, it's like to suggest, really set some ground rules in communication in families and roommates. I think those are great. Sometimes if you're present, we use, in fact, a talking stick, because people like me tend to talk, interrupt people. And by using the classical talking stick, as long as I have that stick, I can talk. And then the language examples you gave are superb. Can you maybe give a few other ones which I can now take home within my family or with others? Like the one about language, don't say you never did this. What are some of the examples like that? That'd be really great.
Funny you should ask. That was my next slide. Fair fighting ground rules, and these are some suggestions that they don't necessarily work for everyone, but I would say if you decide to set up some kind of a dialogue with the person that you're dealing with, or maybe it's on a daily basis, maybe at the end of the day, always after food. And Eric, thank you for talking about that in my class, but you'd never want to meet with somebody on an empty stomach. And if you find in other cultures, they know it better than we do in this culture, which we call America, which I'm not sure what that is. But in other cultures, they refuse to deal with conflicts unless everyone eats first, right? So I think that somebody knows what's going on. They've been around longer than we have. So I would say eat a good food, something, or have a dialogue with that person over some snacks or maybe some finger foods. And then the first thing I have on here is remain calm. Well, you're not going to remain calm if you're hungry. So that's one of the suggestions, is make sure you have food, and make sure everyone has something to drink, preferably, preferably water. But if wine is your thing, then truth through wine, perhaps. Everyone has a glass of wine and they kind of settle down and calm. Next would be express your feelings in words, not actions. Some people will clam up. They'll freak out when you use your actions. They're not used to that, especially now during the pandemic. People are at a heightened alert, and they have to be very careful. You have to be careful with what words you choose, how you use them, and your actions. Next would be specific about what is bothering you. And what I mean by that is don't overwhelm them with every single thing that they do that bothers you. Pick something, maybe one thing at a time. There's a term that we use in the field called fractionation, like you're breaking down the circle of conflict into fractions, like a pie. And each one of those represents all the different things that are bugging you about the other person, and vice versa. So maybe it's you're not taking the garbage out. And the other thing is maybe you're not walking the dog when you're supposed to. And another thing is maybe you're not doing the dishes when you're supposed to. So looking at each individual piece of that pie and working them one at a time instead of focusing on an overwhelming one big conflict. So be specific about what's bothering you. Deal with only one issue at a time. It's kind of what I've just been talking about. No hitting below the belt. And I think we all know that metaphor, but be careful when you're talking about somebody, and be careful with the words you choose. Always and never are words you want to avoid. It's not helpful if you're going to overwhelm somebody with what you're saying. You know, and next would be avoid accusations. Learn to use I messages instead of saying, you always do this. I feel hurt when you do that because I have trust in you, and I feel like your trust is not 100%. And I wish in the future you would come to me without having to go to other people. There's a good I message. So I feel hurt, I feel upset, I feel annoyed, I feel when you do such and such, not only telling them what it is, but also going one step further and saying, in the future, I would appreciate it if you could do such and such. This is the way I would prefer being, right? So avoid accusations, do not generalize, do not stockpile. You know, don't lay the whole brunt of everything that has bothered you on them at one time. And Suzanne, that would be something you would definitely want to avoid. And then last but certainly not least, avoid clamming up. You need to talk. Don't be overwhelmed by the other person. I think dialogue and communication are key here. And, you know, I'm teaching mediation next semester. So if any of you would like to take my class, certainly it's COM 534, I believe, in the Communication Studies Department. I'd love to have you all in that class. It fills up fast, just to let you know, because unfortunately the majority of students that sign up for my mediation and conflict resolution classes are trying to figure out why their significant other is so messed up. And half of what I have to do is get them off that and realize that they're part of it. Right? They have an active role in this problem, and they need to realize that. So I'm going to stop right there because I don't want to be the talking head, and we're getting close to the end of our time. Does anyone have any other questions?
Yes, please. Can I use this opportunity? I would like to ask about the grounding technique. I don't want that the person will be stuck in a past or go to the present moment. I want them to be in the present. I mean, grounded in this moment, in this situation, acknowledge the feeling, like stop, pause, observe, and then react.
Okay.
Is there another technique how to help them to be grounded, not aggressive, frustrated? Thank you.
Thanks, Simona. Yeah, what that tells me usually, in my opinion, is that they're dwelling in the past because that means a lot to them. So something needs to be repaired before we can move on. Whatever that is, you know, sounds like a Dr. Phil moment for me, right? You're going to have to talk about and ask them, tell me what's bothering you. And chances are, given what you're telling me, it's going to be something from the past. Maybe we need to talk about it. Maybe we need to not focus on the present because they're not ready to do that yet. So the bottom line question to them would be, what do we need? What do you need from me for us to be able to focus on the present? And chances are they're going to tell you.
Thank you.
You know, there may be apologies involved. You know, if there was something that you did that you wish you hadn't done, and we have all gone through that, saying something, and as it's leaving your mouth, your brain is already trying, your critical thinking brain, your prefrontal lobes are already saying, oh, no, too late. It's already out there.
But if
And-
some people, I'm sorry, if some people are manipulated by the parents who do have narcissistic trait, I mean, they are not able to express their feelings, they are manipulated with people to the certain roles, how those kind of people can stay in the present because they have parents who manipulate them to the certain roles.
Right.
Or the children. Thank you.
And this sounds like something Blessing was talking about, and it also sounds like something Suzanne was talking about. You know, we're the product of our parents. I'm sorry to have to lay that on you. As much as you may not want to, you know, address that, we are. And our first formative years from year 1 to 4, that's it. And that's where whoever was bringing us up, that's who we are. And that part of you is going to be there for the rest of your life. The rest of it is adaptation, changing. You can control that. But if you are the product of a family that never talked about it, never talked about stuff, right? Blessing, it sounds like that was your issue. And if you were a part of a family that talked about everything, that's another aspect of family upbringing. You have to realize what kind of family situation you grew up in, and chances are you had a choice of either being just like them or being the opposite. It was your decision to make. Depending upon who it is you're dealing with, Simona, it would be hard for me to know how best to answer that. But if you have time afterwards, I would love to have you stay. And Blessing, same thing. And we can talk a little bit. And I think all three of you could benefit because the issues are very similar. They're not exactly the same, but there are some similar traits there.
Well, an applaud and thank you. And I expect all of you to, for your presentation.